This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Welcome everyone to the special edition of All Parsha on the Ramban on Parshas Yisro. Today I would like to share with you one small passage of the Ramban and perhaps delve into the ramifications of what the Ramban is conveying to us in a manner of eon, in a manner of analysis and its effects on other sugyas and other areas of Torah. We're going to focus on one paragraph of the Ramban, on Perek Chav, Pasuk Ches, and the Ramban is discussing the contrast of the way the Torah describes the mitzvah of Shabbos in Parshas Yisro, namely Zachar, versus the way it's described in Parshas Va'eschanan, Shamar. And the Ramban says that in general there is a fundamental difference between mitzvah saseh and mitzvah lo saseh. The Ramban says the emes hu, the truth is, and this Ramban is found in middle of the Divrei Hamaschel Zachar Yom HaShabbos L'Kadshay. He says the truth is gam kein midah zachar b'mitzvah saseh. The midah of zachar is the midah of a positive commandment. V'hu hayoytze mimidas ha'ahava. Positive commandments emanate from love of God. V'hu lamidas harachamim, which is associated with the midah of mercy. Ki ha'oisa mitzvahs adoinav. One who fulfills the bidding, the command of his master, ohov lo, is beloved to him. Ba'adoinav merachim alav, and his master has mercy on him. Umidas shamar b'mitzvahs lo yisaseh. The midah of shamar, enunciated in Va'eschanan, is the mitzvah Aloy Saseh of Shabbos. Zachar is the positive command of Shabbos. Remember the Shabbos in its onset, upon its exit, through Kiddush and Havdalah, and Shamar is to guard from the negative prohibitions of Shabbos. V'hu midas hadin. This emanates from the midah of strict justice, v'yotzim midas hayira, and this is associated with the midah of fear. And that is one who is careful not to violate that which the master commanded that one should avoid. Fears him, ki hanishmar me'asos davar hara, one who is careful from performing, from doing that which the master said is evil, be'inei adoinav, in the eyes of his master, yarei oisa, he fears the master. Therefore, says Ramban, since mitzvah saseh emanates from love, and mitzvah lo saseh, one is careful not to violate it, that emanates from fear, mitzvah saseh gedoyla mi mitzvah lo saseh, the mitzvah saseh is greater than a mitzvah lo saseh. Because love is a greater madrega than fear is. Love is a greater level of closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu than one who fears him. Ki kamoisha ha'ahava gedoyla min ha'yira, as love is greater than fear. Ki ha'mekayim v'oisa begufay v'mamoinoi rotzoin adoinav, one who fulfills and performs with his body and his assets the will of his master, Gadol, is greater min ha'nishmar than someone who is careful me'asis harabe einav, than someone who just is careful not to do that which is evil in the master's eyes. And that's why the Gemara says in Shabbos, and the Gemara says in Yevamos, the following principle: Asi aseh v'doich aloy saseh. Mitzvah saseh can push off aloy saseh. Why? Because aseh represents love, loy saseh represents yira, and ava is greater than yira. Now the Ramban is bothered by a question, because why is it that there is a punishment for violating a negative command, and there's no punishment for not fulfilling a positive command? If love is greater than fear, if aseh is greater than lo saseh, why is there a punishment for violating a lo saseh? There's no punishment for violating an aseh. Says Ramban, that is why the punishment in violating a lo saseh is greater. V'oisin b'idin, we execute justice. Kagoin malkois, for example, we could give lashes if someone violates a law. Misa, or in certain cases, we could administer a death penalty. Ve'ein oisin din b'mitzvah saseh klal, we do not execute any punishment for failure to fulfill a mitzvah saseh. Ela b'mardim, only one who acts out of rebellion. Kamai, someone who says, lulav eini oisa, I'm not taking a lulav, sukkah eini oisa, I'm not going to make a sukkah. So under such circumstances, since it emanates from rebelliousness, shamakin oisai, we smite the guy, chekabel of lasos, oyachetetse navshay, we smite him until he accepts to do it, or until we actually may take his life. But under normal circumstances, even though mitzvah saseh is greater than a lo saseh, nevertheless, the punishment is more for a lo saseh than aseh, because exactly for the reason that a lois haseh is a lower level, so you are held more accountable for not being on the lower level than for not being on the higher level. So this is quite an amazing Ramban. The Ramban says that Zachar is aseh, Shamar is lois haseh, aseh emanates from love, lois haseh emanates from fear, and therefore aseh is doiche lois haseh. So first addition to this Ramban is an amazing perspective of Reb Shmuel Engel, the Maharash Engel. This is in his commentary to the Chumash, associated with Parshas B'Shalach. He has a piece on Tu B'Shvat, and he says the following idea. We know in the Gemara Nivamis, learns out Aseh Doicha Lois Aseh from the juxtaposition of Loisil Shatnis Gedilam Taselacha, that even though you're not to wear shatnis, you do wear tzitzis. So tzitzis, the mitzvah of tzitzis, pushes off the Yisro of shatnis. However, the Gemara says that only Beis Hillel says Aseh Doicha Lois Aseh. Beis Shammai holds Aseh is not Doicha Lois Aseh. Says the Maharash Engel, according to this Ramban, we understand so beautifully why only Beis Hillel holds Aseh is Doicha Lois Aseh and not Beis Shammai. And that is because Beis Hillel emphasized the love of God. Beis Hillel emphasized the importance of love, the importance of demonstrating love to one's friend and love to one's maker. Shammai, on the other hand, was Noikev Hadin Sahar. He emphasized strict justice, he emphasized din, he emphasized yira. Therefore, Beis Hillel is an ahava man. He's a man of love, and in his realm, in his world, Aseh is doicha lois aseh because love is greater than fear. Not so Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai was a man of din. Beis Shammai emphasized fear, and therefore, in fact, in the world of Beis Shammai, Aseh is not doicha lois aseh. And the Maharash Engel develops this point and explains how the Rosh Hashanah for Ilanois is, according to Beis Shammai, Rosh Chodesh Shvat, according to Beis Hillel, Tu B'Shvat, is lishitasam of this machlokes, meaning is consistent with their general worldview. Beis Shammai is a man of fear, by the way. Therefore, according to Beis Shammai, the main Rosh Hashanah of the year is Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the year. That is the day of tshuva, because Beis Shammai is a man of midas hadin, and therefore in his realm, the main tshuva of the year is Rosh Hashanah. And the Maharash Engel develops another idea that something does not come to materialization and concretization, and one cannot begin to recognize something until a third of the way through. A third of the way through the year, 4 months after Rosh Hashanah, is Rosh Chodesh Shvat. So Beis Shammai is l'shitase that the Rosh Hashanah le'ilanois is Rosh Chodesh Shvat, 1/3 of the year after Rosh Hashanah. However, Beis Hillel is a man of love. Beis Hillel holds the main teshuvah is tshuva out of love. Tshuva out of love, as taught by Rabbi Yitzchak of Barditchev, begins on the 15th of Tishrei, on Sukkot. That's the day of Rishon Lecheshbon Avonos, when Hashem starts to calculate our sin, because when we do tshuva out of love, they're transformed into mitzvahs, and therefore 4 months after the 15th day of Tishrei is the 15th day of Shvat. Hence, Beis Hillel holds the Rosh Hashanah La'ilanois is the 15th of Shvat. So this is one important hoisafa to the Ramban, that since love is greater than fear, aseh doicha lois aseh, but that's only in the world of Hillel. In the world of Shammai, where yira reigns supreme, in fact, aseh is not doicha lois aseh. Now, there is a observation of the Sefer Shemois Ba'aretz in his compendium Tosfos Yom HaKippurim, Masechta Yuma Daf Pei Gimel, where the Gemara says if somebody has a ravenous hunger on Yom HaKippurim, and we have to feed them, so we'll feed them what is more lenient first. So, for example, if it's a choice between tevel, which is a chi of misa, and nevela, which is only a lav, of course we'll feed them a nevela. If it's a choice between tevel, which is a chi of misa, and iser shavias, which is an aseh, of course we're going to feed them shavias. Now, interestingly, the Rambam, when he formulates this halacha, the Rambam says, if it's a choice between nevela, which is a lav, and sefiche shvius, which is a drabanon of shvius, we're going to feed them the drabanon of shvius. But everyone seems to be tippy-toeing around what would you do if it's a choice between nevela, which is a lav, and shvius, which is an asay? Why is that not discussed? In fact, says the Tosfos Yom Kippurim, once the Gemara says that if it's a choice between tevel and iser misa and nevela, which is an iser lav, we give them the lav, isn't it automatic that if it's a choice between tevel and shvius, we would give them shvius? Because if a lav is preferable to a chiyuv misa, certainly an asay is preferable to a chiyuv misa. Why would the Gemara have to talk about shvius and tevel once it already spoke about nevela and tevel? Must be, says the Tosfos Yom Kippurim, that if you would have a choice between nevela and shvius, we would prefer to serve someone an iser lav of nevela than an iser asay of shvius, and that's why the Rambam only talks about nevela and the Rabbanon of shvius. But if it would be a nevela and a daraisa of shvius, nevela would be preferable. Why? Says the Tosfos Yom Kippurim, based on this Ramban, that asay is greater than lois asay, and therefore we would prefer to feed someone in iser lav than to feed someone in iser asay, because asay is greater than a lav. Well, this is a very controversial derivative from this Ramban, because the Gemara in Yevamos on Daf Zayin, and this is noted by Rabbi Akiva Eger in the Golyon Hashas, Masechta Yevamos Daf Zayin, the Gemara says the following statement: when do we say asay is doicha lois asay? Lois asay greda. But a lois asay sheyesh by kares, asay does not push away a lav sheyesh by kares. And then the Gemara says, well, how can an asay push away a lav? Lav lois asay chamor minei. Isn't a lav more chamor than an asay? So the Gemara says openly, a lav is more chamor than an asay. So how could the Tosfos Yom Kippurim debate and have a possibility that we would prefer to serve someone a nevela over serving them an iser shvius, as if an asay is more chamor than a lav? The Gemara says explicitly that a lav is more chamor than an asay. After all, we all know the Gemara in Yuma Daf Peivav, if somebody violates an asay and they do tshuva, they're immediately forgiven. But if someone violates a lav, then a tshuva alone does not atone for their violation of the lav. They need tshuva and Yom Kippurim. So in the Sefer Kur Zahav on the Ramban, the Kur Zahav says that in his opinion, the Tosfos Yom Kippurim did not fully understand what the Ramban means. The Ramban does not mean an asay is more chamor than a lav. After all, the Ramban himself said there's only a punishment for violating a lav. There's no punishment for violating an asay. The Ramban says an asay is greater than a lav. What does that mean, an asay is greater than a lav? Similar to what the Gemara says in Adarim. Gedoyla mila. Mila is great. Why? That it pushes off Shabbos. Shedoiche es Shabbos hachamura. So when it comes to Mila, the Gemara says the word Gedoyla, it's great. When it comes to Shabbos, the Gemara says the word Chamura, it's stringent. What's the difference between Gedoyla and Chamura? Gedoyla means great reward. Chamura means grave punishment. Certainly asay is greater than a lois asay in the sense there is more reward for the fulfillment of an asay than avoiding violating a lois asay. That's what we mean, asay is greater. It's a higher madrega and there's more reward. However, the violation of a lav would be a greater, you would incur more the wrath of Hashem by violating a lav, because you don't even have the lower level than lack of fulfillment of an asay. The Meshech Chochmah in Parshas V'Zois HaBracha elaborates and offers a little bit more insight into the words of the Ramban and shows a tremendous ramification and a beautiful ramification of these words of the Ramban. Says the holy Meshech Chochmah, in a laboratory, isolated, what is considered more severe? Not fulfilling an asay or violating a lav? There's no question. Violating a lav is more strict, because you don't even have the basic fear of God not to violate what He said not to do, here, and you have the audacity to proactively violate what he said not to do. Okay, the fact that you maybe are lazy, are not fulfilling an aseh, so you're not yet on the higher level. But you don't even have the lower level. Certainly, in terms of an isolated action, it is worse to violate a lav than not to fulfill an aseh. However, when aseh goes against lav, head on, one against the other, in battle. So what you're trying to do over here is, what does God want? Because certainly whatever you're not doing, whether you're violating the law or not fulfilling aseh, it's not out of rebellion, because here you're in a quandary, you have a dilemma. You want to do what is considered more the will of the Creator. So it's aseh versus lois aseh. And whatever you're not going to be doing is not out of rebellion, but only because you can only do one thing over here. Certainly it's better to fulfill the aseh, because it brings more nachas ruach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when someone fulfills his desire than when in this circumstance, than someone who would not violate his command, since they are going head on. Now comes the Meshech Chachma, and he says an amazing thing. In the Beis HaMikdash, which is a place where God's Shechina is felt and His divine presence is recognized and realized, that is a place of avoida, of ahava, and that is why the Torah in the Beis HaMikdash always emphasizes Umi Mikdashi Tiro. In the Mikdash, where love is natural, the more important thing to focus on is the Yira. Says the Meshech Chachma, now we understand why ein aseh doicha lois aseh shebe mikdash. Now we understand why the rule of aseh doicha lois aseh does not apply in the Beis HaMikdash. Because in the Beis HaMikdash, love does not reign supreme. In the Beis HaMikdash, which is where love is natural, it is more important to emphasize the yira aspect. And even though, so to speak, in the Beis HaMikdash, we see things like Shammai, the same way Marash Engel said, in the world of Beis Shammai, ein aseh doicha lois aseh. Likewise, in the Mikdash, we say ein aseh doicha lois aseh she b'mikdash. I'll just end off with one amazing question that is brought in Shal Tshuvas Shoyel Umeshiv of Rabbi Yosef Shal Halevi Natanzan, Madura Tinyana Tshuva Tzadihei. The Gemara in Shabbos says on Daf Daled, and the following principle: it's better oimrim la'adam chatei kedei sheyiskach haver. Sometimes we'll allow Ruvain to do a small sin so that Shimon should not do a big sin, or that Shimon should be able to fulfill a mitzvah. Asks Rabbi Yosef Shal Levi Natazan, we know aseh is only doicha lois aseh if the aseh and the lois aseh are happening simultaneously, if it's be'idna. But if the aseh is at one time and the lois aseh is at a different time, we do not say aseh is doicha lois aseh. Asks the Shalom Eshev, why not? Why don't we say the principle of the Ramban? If I should sin so that my friend could be zoichet to a great mitzvah, why can't I do a small sin, namely a lav, vis-a-vis the greater zechus, which is an aseh? If I'm allowed to be chatei kedei sheyizka chaveri, if I could do a sin so that my friend could merit, then why can't I do a sin so that I could merit? So why do we only say aseh doicha lois aseh if they happen simultaneously? Why can't we use the principle chatei kedei she'ezke? Why can't I do a small sin a few minutes earlier or a few minutes later in order that I should be able to fulfill a mitzvah aseh? But this is all based on the great principle of the Ramban that zachar is aseh, shamar is lois aseh, and aseh is love, lois aseh is fear. Love is greater than fear. We brought the exception in the world of Beis Shammai. We brought the exception of the Meshech Chachma in the Beis HaMikdash. This is all a great point of Iyun on the words of the Ramban in Parshas Yisro, Parak Chaf Pasuk Ches. Wishing everyone a wonderful Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.